Jordan Peterson is essentially of the belief that human beings are not born with rights. Hey, what is up, guys? So today we're going to be discussing Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and a large and I would call it quite fundamental disagreement, which I have very strong reason to believe they both have. I want to bring attention to this disagreement in hopes to spark some dialogue between their two audiences, as the subject matter of this disagreement is one often viewed as quite trivial on the right side of the political spectrum, where they both reside. And to be clear, I'm not really a fan of Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro. The reason I wanted to make this video is because recently, Jordan Peterson has actually joined the Daily Wire, which is an American conservative news network which Ben Shapiro runs. It was founded by Ben Shapiro and a couple other people. Now, presumably, Ben Shapiro has agreed to have Jordan Peterson join him on his media news network because Jordan possesses views which Ben generally agrees with and views which Ben is okay having spread on its platform. But what if we were to discover that there was something human beings engage in which Ben views as barbaric and Jordan views as quite trivial to stop? Well, this does exist and it concerns the topic of animal rights, but keep watching because this isn't just about a fundamental disagreement with animal rights. It actually concerns a disagreement with fetus rights and human rights in general between Ben and Jordan. So let's start with animal rights. I've covered this on my channel before, but Ben Shapiro has admitted it is a possibility that we will be looked at as barbarians for consuming animals, and has even gone as far to say that he is a moral hypocrite for continuing to engage in the consumption of animals.
Over the past few years, I've heard you repeatedly predict that in 100 years, all of us are going to be looked back upon as barbarians, and I'm quoting you, barbarians, for eating animals, for eating meat.
I said it's a possibility, yeah.
You've predicted it on 3 separate occasions.
I said probably, and I think that's probably true, yeah.
Okay, so
sure.
You stand by that statement. Okay, great. And yet you've never suggested that you would take any action on this topic. You've never suggested that you are going to go vegan, or even vegetarian. I know. And so my question for you is this. How can you make a career off of preaching personal responsibility while failing to take responsibility for your words on this topic?
So one of the contingencies that would make it an absolute brutality in 100 years is that there's actual sources of animal-like protein that are produced without the use of animals. And that is progressing pretty quickly, right? I mean, you're actually seeing animal protein being produced without the killing of animals. I think that's going to make things a lot easier for people. As far as the vegetarian-vegan question, it's something that I've actually seriously considered. I haven't talked about it publicly a lot, but it's something that I've actually pretty seriously considered because, I mean, frankly, I do think that there are I think that on the list of moral evils in American society, I think that this comes in a far, far cry behind things like abortion, for example, like the killing of human beings in the womb. But if you're going to talk about, but if rightly so, you say, okay, well, make your eating habits adhere to a more moral standard. It's something I'll admit I'm a hypocrite on, and it's something that I've thought about a fair bit. So actually, thank you for urging me to consider my hypocrisy and continuing to move in that direction, because I'm thinking about it seriously.
So what we can gather from this clip is that according to Ben Shapiro's moral principles, he is a moral hypocrite for continuing to fund the breeding, exploitation, and killing of animals for food. And presumably, this is because Ben Shapiro thinks that animals should have the right to be free from being victim of particular atrocities entailed by animal agriculture. Just a couple examples: confinement in such close quarters that moving is difficult, subjugation, forcible artificial insemination, or rape, being forced into conditions which induce cannibalism, having your genitals mutilated, having your beak seared off, and of course, being murdered. Now, what does Jordan Peterson think of animal rights? From what I've gathered, Jordan Peterson is of the belief that animals just don't have rights. Now, he didn't just mean this in some purely philosophical sense, saying things like, oh, like rights are just made up or they're just made up concepts. No, he just made this claim or this criticism explicitly about animals. Of course, if Jordan did mean this in this purely philosophical sense, this criticism would just extend to human beings as well, given that human rights are also a made-up concept. Probably the better question here would be, do you believe that animals have rights, or do you believe that humans have rights, as opposed to a question where you're asking, do animals or humans have rights in a sort of mind-independent fashion? So the irony here is that the reasoning that Jordan has for not believing that animals have rights also extends to particular human beings and the fetuses which Ben Shapiro fights so vehemently for in his pro-life campaigns and, pro-life rhetoric in general. Before uncovering what led me to this discovery, here's just a little clip of Jordan Peterson giving his take on animal rights.
Let us instead accept the complexity and the responsibility and the consequences and state forthrightly, rights are for human beings and for individuals, not for groups, and certainly not for animals.
Now here's the same take, worded a little bit differently, but with more justification. This tweet from Jordan says, animals don't have rights. Rights are, by definition, reciprocal. People have responsibilities to animals as well. Terminology matters. So of course we can all be operating from our own proprietary definition of the word rights when speaking on concepts such as rights. And when we look at Jordan Peterson's concept of rights, you can only have rights so long as you can reciprocate said rights. This means that according to Jordan Peterson's concept of rights, it is not just animals who do not possess rights, but also specific mentally disabled humans and the human fetuses which Ben Shapiro fights so much to defend, at least until these fetuses have developed the cognitive capacity required to reciprocate rights. Jordan Peterson is essentially of the belief that human beings are not born with rights, unless of course you are somehow born with the cognitive capacities necessary to reciprocate rights. This is also interesting because while I was thinking about doing this video, I was under the conception that this fundamental disagreement, which I would address here, would only have to do with animal rights. But I've come to discover in the research process for this video that this disagreement also extends to particular mentally disabled humans and human fetuses. I don't know about you guys, but I can only imagine that if I was somebody like Ben Shapiro, who was a vehement believer in the human rights of fetuses and somebody who believed animals had the right to not be subject to all the atrocities I listed before, I would hesitate to bring somebody on who believed that animals, disabled people, and fetuses do not possess rights. Now, one might argue, well, Jordan could just bite this bullet on the concept of rights and still adopt things like a pro-life position and vegan position, professing the idea that although animals, fetuses, and certain disabled people don't have rights, we as people still have responsibilities to not subject them to suffering and death. But even still, imagine being somebody who is pro-life like Ben. I think I'd still have an eerie and repulsive feeling hearing of a person who thinks animals, fetuses, and certain disabled people don't just have the right to be free from suffering and death in and of themselves. And I certainly wouldn't feel the impulse to hire this person to speak to my predominantly pro-life and human fetus rights believing audience. Perhaps Ben Shapiro is unaware of this, or I'm just kind of projecting how I'd feel about this whole scenario. What do you think? Are you somebody who is pro-life? I know many of you guys in my audience are more like pro-choice or take the pro-sentience position. I'm definitely not somebody who is pro-life, but as somebody who could just right now imagine if I was Ben, I mean, I'd feel pretty repulsed and weird to find out that Jordan has these beliefs about fetuses, disabled people, and animals. All right, guys, that is the end of the video. Please leave your comments below. What do you think of Jordan Peterson's concept of rights? Do you think this is a large enough disagreement to, cause some weird feeling or eerie feeling in Ben that would make him maybe feel a little bit weird about hiring Jordan? Or are you one of those people that think that Ben probably wouldn't even care? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you support my work and want to support me on Patreon, the link is in my description below. I will see you in the next video.
Dude.
Fuck off, I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
Even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,